What Ike Allen and Andy Anderson have created at Avaiya is what the world needs.
Hello, Avaiya family. I'm Brielle Starr, Online Education Coordinator for Avaiya. Avaiya is the creator of over 1,000 books, films, courses, teachings, and other supportive resources. Thank you so much for joining us. Our fellow teacher, Summer Lynn, is with us today to talk about movement as an addiction recovery tool. Samar is a curious investigator of the human experience and a movement catalyst. She is also a certified five rhythms teacher, a trained emotional body worker, art therapist, and integrative coach. Welcome to Avaiya, Samar.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for being here with us today to talk with us about such an important topic. And it's going to be really interesting to learn more. So, yes, thank you.
Great. Thanks.
Yes.
Nice to meet you. Nice to feel you all out there in the online ethers.
Yes, absolutely. And so to get us started today, since we are talking about addiction, could you tell us about how you define addiction?
Yeah. So when we think about addiction, we can think about it as any compulsive or uncontrollable behavior that we engage in to escape our feelings or our thoughts, essentially escaping reality in a way that eventually becomes averse or we have negative consequences. When we think about behaviors, we can think about like substance use. We can also think about acts such as sex or even work, and even things like obsessive thinking or thought loops can become addictive or compulsive to a point where we stop being able to be connected to ourselves and be in the presence.
hmm Yeah, thank you for giving us a little background there about your definition of addiction and what that means and looks like. And so then what would be the connection between the body and addiction?
hmm So when we are in this state of escape, let's call it, so when we're moving away from our feelings or reality, there's two things that are happening. So one, a lot of times we're hurting and abusing our bodies, whether it's taking in a substance, whether it's overeating or not eating enough, where it could be something like work, where we're not sleeping enough. So there is an abuse that's happening to the body and therefore a disconnection with the body. And the second piece of that is because I'm no longer present when I'm in an addictive state, I'm actually not available inside myself. I'm not able to really feel and sense my body. And therefore, there's a lot of harm that's done to the physical body in these two ways when it comes to addictions and compulsive behaviors.
hmm Yeah, definitely. There could be so much harm done. And some of those addictions you mentioned, I think a lot of people might not even consider to be addictions, such as something like work or those thought patterns that you mentioned right in the beginning. And I know some people even consider there's such thing as good addictions, such as work or things like that. Do you have any thoughts about that? And is there such thing as a good addiction, or is it all ultimately going to be harming us in some way at the end?
Yeah, great question, and also very connected to my own personal journey because one of my addictions was work, and at the beginning, it was always rewarded. So I was getting promotions at work or salary increases. I was getting praise, and so everything felt good. But when I started realizing it was an addiction, was when it started having adverse consequences. So when I wasn't getting enough sleep, when I wasn't taking care of myself enough with food, when I wasn't spending as much time with my friends anymore because I had the sort of drive to work. And so I think there are some addictions that as a society we might fuel. And I like to call them pretty addictions because on the surface, they're all like wrapped up and looking good. But underneath, there is a space where we're suffering. So, where there might be a sense of loneliness or isolation or disconnection from ourselves or other people. And so, I would maybe the behavior could be considered positive, but there's this tipping point when something can become addictive or compulsive.
Yeah. Yeah, I really appreciate you diving in there and giving us a little bit more information towards that. And you mentioned this idea that there are things underneath that addiction, underneath why we're spending all of our time working and neglecting ourselves and perhaps our physical health or our friends and family. How can people discover what is the issue lying beneath or issues lying beneath? How do we go about that?
Mhm. So when we think about before something becomes an addiction, that can help give a little bit of a clue. And it starts almost as a way that we're trying to take care of ourselves or we're trying to soothe ourselves. So I might find that maybe I'll give the example of something connected to work. Maybe my self-esteem is a little bit low. And therefore, I notice that as I work, I feel a little bit better about myself. And so that drive to work had a positive reward at the beginning where I was starting to feel maybe better about myself. But that tipping point happens when I'm no longer able to receive the gifts because I have to keep working more in order to feel good enough. And then it also affects then the other aspects of my life. And so it's really interesting and very important to kind of get curious about that underneath the surface. And usually there are uncomfortable thoughts that we have about ourselves, or difficult belief systems that we have about ourselves or about the world, or feelings that we don't actually know how to feel. We might not have been given the permission to feel those difficult feelings. So, for example, if I'm not feeling comfortable being angry and I'm getting angry, I might take a drink or I might even smoke as a way to try to suppress that anger. I might feel scared, but fear might be labeled a bad emotion for me. So then I'll go into like some sort of obsessive thought loop to try to understand a particular situation or play out how something might happen in order to mitigate that feeling of fear. And something else that might be really interesting to think about is how a lot of the addictions or compulsions that we have is really a way we try to regulate our nervous system. And if we weren't taught to regulate our nervous system, so if that wasn't modeled to us well, or we were taught to suppress certain ways of being, it is much more likely we will then go to these escapes to try and regulate ourselves.
Mhm. Yeah, totally. I could see how those uncomfortable thoughts or feelings could leave us wanting to get away from ourselves outside of our bodies and find an escape. And you just now mentioned that a lot of people suppress different types of emotions. I know I have a bit of an issue with anger, because I just have negative beliefs about what that means. And so, in order to really move forward, is it important for us to actually be in our body and be present with all of our emotions and not attach negative stories or beliefs to them?
Yeah, that is one of the keys to our long-term healing, and it's sometimes like it's actually a lot easier said than done, and that's where movement can play such an important role in that relationship to healing, because emotions are and feelings are energy. And movement is a way for us to be in connection to those different energies. So it's one thing to say, yeah, it's okay to be angry. But what happens when I start discovering what anger feels like, for example, in my jaw, and even if I just move my face, what happens if I start noticing what anger feels like just in the fist of my hand, and I start finding movement through my body from that fist in my hand, and ways in which we can be curious about how the energy of an emotion might move in the body instead of attacking or trying to change that thought in and of itself. And we start discovering that there's a lot of power in those spaces of emotions.
Hmm. Yeah, totally. I love that idea of really bringing movement to this. And I know that's what you're going to be sharing a lot with us about today. So, is there anything else you can tell us about how movement can enable also long-term recovery, not just short-term?
Mm-hmm. Mhm. So what movement does is it gives us a tool of again, coming into the present by connecting to our body. And that's where we lose ourselves in addiction, where we're no longer present, we're no longer in our body. It teaches us how to be curious in an ongoing way of like, well, what is that sensation that is coming up in my body? And how might I be able to move it? So it's really an ongoing tool of discovery, an ongoing tool of expression, and an ongoing tool then of release, because we all have emotions. They will never go away. And a lot of times, once we put down our addictions, my last and greatest addiction, for example, was cigarette smoking. And when I put that down, I was dancing a lot more, because once I put that down, there was a lot of emotions that wanted to come out and to come through. And it's an ongoing space where we get to connect to ourselves and other people as well.
Yes. Beautifully said. I love that you just brought up that idea of connecting with ourselves as well as also connecting with others. And so, for anyone who's interested in exploring more movement, especially when it comes to something like recovery, do you have any suggestions for where people could go about this? Are there groups? Are there online communities? What would you suggest?
Mhm. So there's a lot of sort of conscious dance practices out there in the world. As you had mentioned with my introduction, the practice that I hold space for is called Five Rhythms, that there's classes that are being held all around the world. So just being in a space where you can connect to your body and movements and feelings, there's a lot of that out there. I hold a special format of addiction recovery where there is a combination of sharing as well as movement and dance in the bodies. And of course, you can always just put on a really great track at home and move to it. But there is something very special about being in community as part of recovery. Because one of the things that addiction does is not only does it take us away from our bodies in the present moment, but it takes us away from connection to ourselves, but also to other people. And as human creatures, that connection with others in a safe and healthy way is a very key ingredient to healing as well.
Awesome. Amazing. Thank you for sharing a little bit more about that and the practice that you share with and work with in your life and your work. And do you find that different types of movement can actually help with different types of emotions or issues within the body?
Yeah, great question. So if with movement, we can think about movement already in the sense of like exercise or maybe even yoga. And there's a lot of research that's been done on all the benefits of exercise, like increasing dopamine or endorphins. It helps move through that fight flight potential reaction that's in the nervous system. But what is so beautiful about spontaneous movement practices such as Five Rhythms is that it really gives us the agency to be curious moment by moment what is arising in the body, and the agency to express that. So a dance class, for example, could be fun. A yoga class is very beautiful as well. But what I'm most curious about when I'm supporting other people, and as I had been in my own journey, is what is that personal freedom of expression that is coming up? And where is a space that you feel safe enough to start exploring that, but also where you can be with a feeling that comes up as well? Because once we start moving our bodies, feelings will inevitably come up.
Mhm.
And it's really important then to be able to feel safe in a container to also express the feelings instead of trying to push down the feelings that are coming up as you're moving
Mhm.
or dancing, and then you're in the same kind of loop of escaping or suppressing that the addiction had triggered in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that you just mentioned safety, and that seems like it would be so important, especially in the context of movement. And you also shared about this idea of personal freedom of expression, which that sounds beautiful and amazing, of course. But I'm wondering, do you find that some people might have an issue accessing that due to self-criticism, especially when it comes to something like dance or freeform movement?
Absolutely. I'm a product of that myself when I first started. Uh, and it's quite amazing when we allow ourselves to be uncomfortable with that level of curiosity. Something will start slowly opening up for us. And so I think the places in which we go might look different for different people. So some people might feel much more comfortable starting just at home or with some friends or working with someone one-on-one, for example. Others feel safer in a small group. Some people find more anonymity in a big dance space or in a big group. And it's really this very interesting process of, okay, can I take a few steps to be uncomfortable and see that even if I'm moving a little bit or not at all, that it's still okay, that I can still be here, that there is no even right definition of how much someone should be moving or what freedom of movement actually looks like.
Mhm. Oh, I love that. There's no right way or no way it has to be. I could see that being an issue in the beginning for some people. I know for myself, perfectionism is something that's always running in the background. So for anyone listening who's hearing that, it's always lovely to hear about this no right way, and it's your own freedom of expression, as you shared earlier. And have you found that self-compassion can also be really helpful in recovery as well as when exploring movement for recovery?
Absolutely. So I always think there's a few like sort of key ingredients for recovery, also for movement. One is, as we were talking about, of being curious. And with that curiosity, um, non-judgment and compassion naturally come. If I start asking myself, how is this happening in my body? Instead of, why is this happening? Or instead of, I should be doing something, just saying, huh, what is here? What am I doing? How am I being? In a way, almost like that, the innocence of a child. And that is such a key ingredient to recovery and just to our personal freedom overall. And that's where I think the compassion will comes naturally when we allow for us to be curious instead of judging and defining things to be a certain way.
Yes, beautifully said once again. I love that answer. And yeah, it's great to hear that it can become a more natural instinct to be compassionate towards ourselves when we open up to more curiosity and not thinking everything has to be one way or a specific way. So that's exciting to hear. And coming back around to addiction itself, why do you think that so many people find it so hard and difficult to really kick addiction?
hmm So even though there's, I think, a lot of movement in terms of understanding addiction as a dis-ease, we often don't see the holistic way in which addiction sort of assaults or attacks our bodies. And there's still this belief of if you had enough discipline, or if you had enough self-will, or if you were just doing it right, none of those things would happen. So there's still this often very like hard line that we take with ourselves. And the key to that recovery is both multifaceted and long term. So when we think of it, it's really a dis-ease of disconnection. And when I've been disconnected, connection doesn't just get to happen just like that. it takes time. It takes a process to come back into connection with the self, to start trusting the self, to start listening to the self, to start trusting and listening to another. Also, addiction in many ways is a very deeply rooted habit that happens. And when there's the trigger that kicks in, like let's say I'm in this uncomfortable feeling of a fear state because my boss just yelled at me, the habit of me escaping that fear, whether it's a drink or working harder or you know, even exercising excessively, whatever it might be, that habit kicks in quicker than we can even think. And so we're really learning to rewire our system. And we're learning almost, I like to say, we start learning to stretch time. Because when a habit kicks in, our prefrontal cortex, a part of us that can actually think and make decisions, goes offline. But as I learn to stretch time when something triggers a potential addictive response, I start creating choice for myself. And that also takes time to build and develop long term as well. And then, of course, there's some of the roots of addiction, which is pain or difficult feelings, trauma that we've experienced that deserve time and space and love for healing. So it's a multifaceted journey, and it takes time. And I also like to think about recovery like going to the gym or brushing our teeth, because we never think once I've brushed my teeth once, I'll never have to brush them again. And sometimes we think about that with healing of like, once I've looked at this or once I've dealt with that, I'll never have to look at it again. But it's an ongoing process and an ongoing journey. And I think these are some of the reasons we can get so stuck, because we want instant feedback of success.
Yeah, totally. I really appreciate you sharing some of those different reasons. And I think anyone who is dealing with addiction, hearing that out loud can be really helpful to hear what might be going on there and some of the difficulties that so many people are experiencing. It's common. And so, yeah, and I also love that idea that we're not going to do one thing and we're just healed forever. And that goes, yeah, with anything. It's a process and coming back around to ourselves and being with ourselves and exploring what's next for us on our journey. So I love that. And then for anyone listening today who is stuck in an addiction or a compulsive pattern, what would be your suggestion of a first step that those listeners can take?
Mhm. Yeah. So one is just to know that you're not alone, because sometimes it can really feel like we're suffering on our own. So that's the very first place to be. And the second is acceptance, just accepting that, wow, there is something that I am going through that I'm finding it very difficult or impossible to stop. And acceptance already carries a weight of wisdom, a possibility of hope, or a different way. And bringing in this element of curiosity of like, okay, well, how might it be able to be different? And a lot of times when we're stuck in those places, we're not able to feel that compassion that we were talking about earlier, or that care for the self. And so one of my suggestions is to say, if I loved myself right now, if I could really feel compassion for myself right now, what might I do? Where might I go to get some support? And that starts opening up the door as well. And I always encourage people to reach out to someone else there, where someone who might have been going through or has gone through something similar before, because it can be so isolating. And we're really not alone. And there is hope. There is a lot of possibility for change.
Mhm. Well, wonderful. So beautifully said once again. And yeah, I love that message that no one is alone, no matter what they're experiencing, and there is support to be found and always hope as well. So that was amazing and beautifully worded. And let's talk a little bit about how people can dive even deeper with you and the work that you do. I know you have a free gift today, which is called Wildly Calm, Disarming Stress in Daily Life. And then we also have your special offer, which is your Resilience in Addiction Recovery. And we have buttons leading over to both of those different options down below if you'd like to tell us about each of them.
Great. Yeah, thank you. So Wildly Calm is a 7-day offer of starting to understand how the nervous system responds to stress. It is a multifaceted program that includes a combination of education or like food for the brain of how stress in and of itself can be a habit, almost like an addiction also becomes like a habit. Stress, our relationship to stress can become a habit. So understanding that, being curious about how to break those habit loops with some questions, with some body-based movement, and with some meditations, and learning how to come back into the body and to be present. So that's the first one.
Awesome. And then what about your second one?
So the workshop coming up at the in the middle of May, which is actually here in Berlin, where I'm based, is a exploration about resilience in addiction recovery. And here we're working on the theme of yes, resilience, and very much through the body of understanding what it is like to be able to fall down metaphorically and stand back up again, because that is part of the process of us being able to stay in the healing journey, and continuing to develop a deeper relationship with the body and with the creative exploration of feelings, and leaving that workshop with tools on how to be in with the self in moments of joy, because sometimes joy can be a very difficult emotion, but also some other harder emotions for other people, like fear or anger, and what are some tools to take back into your daily life to build that resilience and connection to the self and each other.
Amazing. Thank you so much for creating and offering both of those amazing resources for people to check out. Both sound beyond wonderful. And as a reminder to everyone watching or listening, you can click the buttons below and head over to check those out. And then, are there any final insights that you'd like to share before we wrap up?
Let me think. Yeah, well, just stay curious, everyone, and allow that to support your enjoyment and your explorations and your own freedom.
Awesome. Thank you so much once again for being here with us today and for putting so much emphasis on curiosity and helping guide us about wisdom and recovery. So it was awesome speaking with you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, absolutely. And I also want to thank our Avaiya students for joining us today. And we will see you all again real soon. Take care, everyone.
Avaiya has changed my life.
Avaiya has made me the woman I am today.
Avaiya is my home.
Avaiya is personal freedom.
Avaiya is the reason my life continuously improves.
Let everyone in your life know about Avaiya.
Everyone needs to know about this amazing company.
Thank you, Avaiya, for appearing in my inbox.
What Ike Allen and Andy Anderson have created at Avaiya is what the world needs.